The chamber held 47 species, and one insult. The Galactic Convergence Council met once a year in the Great Stone Hall of Velkar Prime. The ceiling was so high that the lights near the top looked like distant stars. The floor was black, and polished so well that every delegate could see their own reflection in it. 48 seats curved around a central speaking platform in a wide arc, each seat the same height, the same width, equally spaced, except one. The 48th seat sat at the far left edge of the arc. It was smaller, set back from the others by 3 full meters. Installed 11 years ago when humanity joined the council, and in 11 years, not one person had suggested moving it. Ambassador Yael Dov sat in it with both feet flat on the floor. She was 63 years old. Her hair was silver, cut short. Her jacket was dark blue, with no medals, no rank decorations, only the small silver circle of earth on her lapel, regulation size. She had a glass of water in front of her. She had not touched it. She had arrived early, taken her seat, and gone very still, the way certain animals go still when they know something is coming. The chamber filled around her. 47 species, each in their own colors, their own ceremonial dress, their own quiet conversations. Translation earpieces clicked into place. Aides arranged documents. Someone laughed at something near the back. The sound bounced off the stone ceiling. No one came to speak with Yael Dov. No one had, in 11 years. Ambassador Sorveth of the Velkari took his place at the central dais. He was tall. All Velkari were tall, narrow-shouldered, with long fingers and eyes the color of pale copper. He wore the full formal robe layered gray and gold, which in Velkari diplomatic tradition meant maximum authority. He had a glass tablet in front of him with notes on it, but he did not look at the notes. He looked at the chamber. He looked at each delegation in turn, slowly, the way a person looks around a room they built and own. He looked at Yael Dov last, just briefly. Then, he looked away. The Galactic Convergence Council is called to session, he said, in clean galactic standard. The primary matter before us today concerns the status of Terran membership. He did not rush. He was too good at this to rush. This council admitted Earth to full membership 11 years ago, he continued. At that time, the Terran representatives presented certain projections about their civilization's growth, their fleet capacity, their drive development, their contribution to council operations. He picked up the glass tablet, still did not look at it. Today, I would like to review what those projections became. He read the numbers. He started with Earth's total registered fleet count. He read it slowly, separated each digit from the next with a small pause, and let the number sit in the air of the chamber afterward like a bad smell. Someone in the left section made a sound, not quite a laugh, more a short exhale of surprise. That was enough. The sound traveled. A murmur became a chuckle, became something spreading warmly through the room, and Sorveth let it spread, said nothing, gave it room to grow. He read the drive technology classification next. 3 full generations behind Council standard. He read the defensive range estimates. He read the tactical summary, filed by Velkari Military Intelligence, which described Earth's military command structure as internally inconsistent, and Earth's strategic framework as absent in any meaningful operational sense. He read a comparative table showing where humanity ranked among member species in 12 different military categories. 12 categories, 48th in 10 of them. The laughter was open now. Not cruel, that was the worst part of it. Not cruel, just easy. The way people laugh at something that is simply, obviously, undeniably small. The Trelshan delegates were smiling. The Orvith bloc had stopped pretending to look at their documents. Even the usually reserved Kalith representative had turned to say something to an aide, and the aide was shaking his head with a smile. 47 species. 47 sets of eyes that had found something to agree on. Yael Dov did not move. Her aide, Bren, sat beside her. He was 26 years old, and this was his 3rd month on his first diplomatic posting, and he had worked every day of the past 4 years to be here. His stylus was in his hand. He had written nothing with it. His jaw was clenched tight enough that a small muscle jumped in his cheek on a steady rhythm, like a clock counting something down. Yael Dov did not look at him. She looked at the central dais. She watched Sorveth the way you watch a road you have already driven, looking for nothing, missing nothing. Sorvith set the tablet down. Given the evidence before this council, he said pleasantly, I move to reclassify Earth's membership from full standing to provisional status, effective at the close of this session. He looked around the chamber. This reclassification would suspend Terran veto rights, territorial guarantees, and priority resource contracts pending a full review. He spread his hands. I opened the floor. No one spoke for Earth. There was no one to speak. Humanity had no alliances in this room. They had been here for 11 years, and they had traded. They had attended every session. They had been polite in every corridor, and they had been, at every point, small enough to be safe to ignore. And things that are safe to ignore are very easy to push. Yael Dov raised her hand. The room noticed, went quieter. Ambassador Dov, Sorvith said. Generous, gracious. Giving her the floor because it cost him nothing. She stood. She was shorter than anyone else standing in the chamber. Under Article 14, Section 2 of the Council Charter, she said, any motion affecting the standing of a member species requires a 30-day review period before the vote may be formally called. Her voice was flat and even. I invoke that provision. A silence settled over the room. Not the comfortable silence from before. A different kind. Sorvith blinked once. His smile held, but it had to work to do it. That is, naturally you're right. Thank you, she said. She sat down. The motion was tabled. 30 days. Procedural. Unanimous approval. Because there was no legal reason to refuse it. Because she had asked within her rights. Because it changed nothing. 30 days made no difference when the outcome was already decided. The session adjourned. In the corridor, a junior Velkari attaché raised his personal holo device and photographed the empty Earth seat. She was already gone. He captioned the image in 3 languages and posted it to his public channel, noted and dismissed. It received a large number of responses, mostly approving. Bren caught up to Yael Dov in the transport bay. He had been half running. He was breathing faster than he should have been for the distance. Ambassador. She kept walking. They humiliated us. His voice came apart slightly at the end. He was very young. He had earned this posting, and he had watched the room laugh, and he did not know where to put it. She stopped at the transport door. Not because of what he said. She stopped because she needed to enter her access code. No, she said. She entered the code. The door opened. They counted us. Bren opened his mouth. Closed it. She stepped aboard. The door sealed. The transport lifted from the bay, and below them, the city of Velkar Prime spread out wide and bright, and completely sure of itself. She sat down. She set her bag on her knees. She reached inside and took out a small device, black, old, scratched at one corner from years of handling. She opened a channel. It connected without ringing. Someone on the other end had been waiting. She said 3 words. 30 days. Go. She closed the channel. Put the device away. Snapped the bag shut. Outside the window, 10,000 lights glittered across the capital of the most powerful species in the known galaxy. Comfortable. Certain. Very sure of what it had just seen. She did not look at it. She leaned back and closed her eyes and stayed very still for the whole journey home. And whatever she was feeling, fear or relief, or the particular exhaustion of someone who has just released a thing they cannot take back, was hers alone, locked behind a face that had never once given anything away. The first sign came at 0300, and no one recognized it as a sign. A Velkari long-range listening post on the edge of Terran space logged an automated status ping from a human cargo hauler, registry number TCS 7741, operating near the Kessel Belt. Routine. The kind of signal that arrives by the thousands every standard hour and gets sorted into a log file that no one reads unless something goes wrong. At 0400, there was no follow-up ping. At 0500, there were no pings from any Terran vessel in the monitoring zone. At 0600, a junior signals officer flagged it as a possible sensor fault and submitted a maintenance request. At 0900, the maintenance team reported the sensors were working perfectly. The signals were simply not there. By noon, the flag had been passed up the chain twice. By mid-afternoon, it had been passed up twice more, and the word anomaly had been replaced in the internal reports with a word no one said aloud yet, but everyone was beginning to think. By midnight, Every registered human vessel across 37 star systems had gone dark. 42,000 ships. No jump signatures. No explosions. No wreckage fields. No distress calls. No static. No automated emergency protocols. No final transmissions. No debris. Nothing that any of those ships left behind that could explain what had happened to them. Just silence, stretching out across a third of the mapped galaxy, where human transponder signals had been a constant background noise for 11 years. Gone. The Velkari Council convened an emergency session at 0200 the following morning. The emergency session was not comfortable. 47 species sitting in the dark of a chamber that was designed for daylight ceremony, talking in low voices, trying to find the edge of something none of them could see the shape of yet. Two theories formed inside the first hour. The first theory was that something had gone wrong. Some cascading failure in Terran drive technology. They had been 3 generations behind standard after all. And that kind of gap invited accidents. 42,000 ships with the same design flaw, perhaps. Some chain reaction that propagated across the fleet before anyone could respond. It was a terrible thing, if true. 42,000 ships meant millions of people. But it was also, in a way, a clean explanation. It fit the story everyone already had about humanity: primitive, overextended, unable to keep pace with the rest of the galaxy. Their luck had simply run out. Most delegates preferred this theory. The second theory was not spoken aloud. It lived in the back of the room, in the spaces between what people said, in the careful way certain intelligence officers chose their words when they briefed their delegations. The second theory was that the disappearance was not an accident, that 42,000 ships had gone dark because someone had given an order, and that someone was human. That theory made the silence feel different. Velkari Signals Command sent hails to Earth's automated response systems. The systems answered. They always answered polite, prompt, in perfect galactic standard. The response was the same every time, no matter which channel was used, no matter what the query. All Terran vessels are currently operating under communications silence, as provided under Section 7 of the Terran Defense Protocols. Standard service will resume at the appropriate time. Thank you for your patience. Section 7. A junior signals analyst named Veth, 29 years old and 3 years into her posting at the Velkari Intelligence Directorate, looked up Section 7, the same way she looked up everything carefully. From the beginning. It did not exist in the Council Communications Treaty. It did not exist in the bilateral contact agreements signed between Earth and 20 other member species. It did not appear in any document filed under Terran membership records in the main Council archive. Veth ran a secondary search. A deeper one. The kind that reaches into the filing systems nobody maintains anymore. The ones that store documents submitted in the early years of a member's admission, when protocols are still being established, and nobody knows yet what matters. She found it. A unilateral declaration, filed by the Terran delegation 11 years ago. Filed, stamped, logged, and placed in a subfolder called Terran Internal Governance Documents for Reference Only. A folder that received, on average, 4 views per year, all of them automated. The document was 20 pages long and dry as sand. Most of it was procedural. But Section 7, one paragraph, very short, described the conditions under which the entire Terran fleet could be placed under total communications blackout, simultaneously, by order of senior diplomatic authority. The conditions were described as hostile diplomatic action against Earth's standing or sovereign interests. The document was dated 11 years ago, the same month that the first internal Velkari proposal to reclassify Earth as provisional had been circulated among senior ministers. Veth sat with that for a while. Then she started pulling flight data, 11 years of it. Every registered human vessel, every logged transit, every filed route. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She pulled it anyway. What she found, after 6 hours of work, was a pattern that wasn't a pattern. Human ships had a known habit. It was in 17 separate intelligence assessments, mentioned as a quirk, a technical limitation, evidence of the general imprecision of Terran navigation. Every human ship, on every transit, flew slightly off the standard lane. Not much. A few degrees. Within acceptable tolerance. But consistently wrong. And wrong in a different direction every time. Every ship, every route. 17 assessments had noted it. 0 had investigated it. Veth pulled the deviation maps. She overlaid them. 42,000 ships. 11 years of slightly wrong routes. She expected them to cluster, to show some common drift, some systemic navigation error she could source to a hardware fault or a calibration problem. They did not cluster. 42,000 ships. 42,000 completely different deviations. No two ships had ever taken the same unlisted path. No two captains had wandered in the same wrong direction. The deviations did not overlap even once in 11 years of data. She stared at the map for a long time. Then she understood what she was looking at. Not imprecision. A catalog. 42,000 ships spending 11 years mapping every route that no one had ever officially charted. Every gap between lanes. Every approach that the standard navigation databases did not record. Each one different. Each one adding another path to a network that existed nowhere in any official file. A network that 42,000 ships could use to move anywhere without a single transponder ping. Without a trace. Without warning. Veth filed her report at 0400. She marked it urgent. She marked it for the senior director's eyes only. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling of her small office and thought about how, for 11 years, every intelligence assessment had looked at slightly wrong navigation data and written down the word imprecision. She thought about what the right word was. She thought about 37 star systems full of silence. She thought about the 30-day review period that one small woman in a too small chair had requested in the calmest voice Veth had ever heard. She did not sleep. She did not think she would sleep for some time. The 30-day review period expired on a Tuesday. Nobody remembered later which species had first noticed that the Terran motion could not legally proceed. The council charter required a quorum that included a representative of the species being reclassified. No human delegate was registered. No human delegate had been registered since the day Yael Dov's transport lifted from the bay at Velkar Prime. The Velkari legal team spent 6 days finding this clause. It was not hidden. It was in the charter. It had been in the charter since the charter was written. It had simply never mattered before, because no member species had ever disappeared. The motion died quietly, in a legal filing that no one released to the public channels. Nobody called Earth to tell them. There was no one to call. The silence from Terran space continued. Outside the council chamber, things were going wrong in a different way, and going wrong quietly, which was worse. 6 Velkari resource extraction contracts had been signed in what was now former Terran territorial space. The contracts had been the main economic reason for reclassifying Earth in the first place. Provisional status would dissolve Earth's territorial claims and open those systems to exploitation. The contracts were ready. The haulers were fueled. The first teams launched within 72 hours of the motion being tabled. They arrived to find the asteroid fields empty. Not mined empty. No ore. No trace minerals. No formations that matched any of the survey data. Centuries of resource mapping, bought from independent contractors and verified by 3 separate Velkari survey firms, showed rich deposits throughout those systems. The deposits were simply not there anymore. The Velkari survey firms rechecked their data. The data was accurate. The surveys had been done correctly. The resources had been there. The resources were not there now. There was no geological explanation for where they had gone. One of the extraction team leaders filed a report describing the asteroid fields as reorganized. It was the only word she could find that fit. The rocks were there. The formations were there. Everything was there except the thing that made it valuable, and whatever process had removed it had done so without leaving any marks. The report went into the same subfolder as Veth's navigation analysis. Nobody put them together yet. Meanwhile, intelligence operatives from 4 different member species were dispatched to human colony worlds. The briefings were direct. Make contact, gather information, determine the status and location of the fleet. Standard work. The kind of thing intelligence services do after an unexpected event. They arrived to find the colonies open and functioning. The colonists were polite. They offered food and water. They answered questions about local weather, crop yields, infrastructure upgrades. They could not, they said, speak to fleet positions, as that was a military matter above their clearance level. They did not know when standard communications would resume. They were sure it would be soon. Could they offer anything else? Every colony was the same. Every colonist gave answers that were slightly different in their wording but identical in their content. Not scripted, or if scripted, scripted well enough that no operative could find the seams. They smiled the same smile, not unfriendly, not nervous. The smile of people who had been told exactly what to expect and had decided to be absolutely fine with it. One Trelshan operative, a 15-year veteran, came back from a colony visit and told his director that in 15 years, he had interviewed people hiding things in many different ways. Frightened people, guilty people, loyal people who hid things for love or duty. He had never interviewed people who hid things the way those colonists did. Like they weren't hiding anything, he said. Like everything they weren't telling me was simply not a secret. Just not his business. Not mine. His director asked what the difference was. He thought about it for a moment. Secrets make people tense, he said. These people weren't tense. They were patient. Meanwhile, Ambassador Sorveth began receiving visitors. The first was a merchant who appeared in the lobby of his private estate on Velkar's resort moon. Nobody on his staff could explain how the man had gotten past security. The merchant was human, middle-aged, unremarkable in every visible way. He asked Sorveth 3 questions about Velkari trade lane commitments in the outer sectors. Politely, without threat. He thanked Sorveth for his time and left. The security team reviewed the entry logs. The merchant did not appear in them. The second visitor was a woman who sat down across from Sorveth at an industry conference he had not publicized his attendance at. She was human. She asked about the defensive alliance the Velkari had recently renegotiated with the Orveth Compact. She was curious about the exact terms regarding mutual aid provisions. She asked as though they were simply making conversation. She finished her drink and excused herself. The third was a maintenance worker at the orbital station that serviced Velkari diplomatic transports. Human. He asked about the resupply contracts, the fuel pricing agreements, who held them, and how long they ran. 3 humans. 3 different conversations. All polite. All brief. All asking questions about exactly how, and from where, and for how long, Velkari power was fed and fueled and sustained. Sorveth filed a harassment complaint with the Council Secretariat. The Council Secretariat responded that no human delegates were currently registered to receive the notification. The complaint was logged and set aside. Sorveth did not sleep well. He told himself it was the complaint, the frustration of process. He was a diplomat, not a soldier, and the tools available to him were procedural ones, and the procedures were running into walls he could not see clearly enough to walk around. He told himself that. 3 weeks after the fleet disappeared, a Velkari admiral named Sarak received a data package on a secure channel. The routing was clean, passed through 17 relay points, each one a different network, each one in a different jurisdiction. No sender was listed. The package contained no message, no threat, no demand, just a file. A star map. Sarak opened it on his secure display and looked at it for a long time without moving. It showed every Velkari military installation in the home sectors, every resupply depot, every defensive perimeter, every patrol route, and its schedule. The data was accurate, he knew, because he had access to the real figures, and the map matched them down to unit positions that had changed within the past 6 weeks. Overlaid on the Velkari positions, in a different color. 42,000 projected fleet positions. Human ships, labeled with transit times. Estimated hours to target, calculated from the navigation network that Veth had mapped and that no senior officer had yet read about. 72 hours. Every installation on the map could be reached in 72 hours, by ships using routes that did not officially exist. There was no order attached, no ultimatum, no deadline. No communication channel to respond to, only the map, and the numbers, and the silence of someone who had chosen, very deliberately, not to do the thing they were demonstrating they could do. Sarak sat in his office for a long time. He did not call the information a threat. He could not call it a threat. A threat required words, demands, conditions. This was simply a demonstration. A hand placed on a table, open, palm up, showing what it held. Choose, it said, without saying anything. He understood, sitting there in his office with the map on his screen, that this was not the opening move of something. It was the closing move of something that had started 11 years ago. The most frightening part was not what the map showed. The most frightening part was how calm it made him feel, the strange, specific calm of a man who has been confused for a long time and has finally found the shape of the thing that was confusing him. He had been outplayed. He simply had not known the game was running. The paper was published on a Wednesday, in the middle of everything, by a professor at the Trelshan Academy of Applied Xenopolitics named Orvala Sen. She had been working on it for 4 years. She had started it as a theoretical exercise, a study in how a low-resource species might compensate for military disadvantage through behavioral adaptation. She had not named Earth in the early drafts. She had not needed to. By the time she finished, the paper named nobody. It simply described a set of strategies, sourced exhaustively from 11 years of publicly available data. And any reader who paid attention would understand exactly which species she was writing about. The title was dry and academic. On the evolutionary psychology of a species that survived itself. It became the most read document in the history of the Trelshan Academy within 48 hours. Her core argument was not complicated. She wrote it plainly, and the plainness of it was what made it land so hard. Humanity, she wrote, had spent 300,000 years as prey. Small, slow, soft. No claws worth mentioning. No armor. Poor night vision. Unable to outrun most of the things that wanted to eat them. They had survived anyway, and then they had become the most dangerous thing on their own planet. And then they had killed or driven out almost everything that had competed with them. And they had done all of it without ever becoming fast or armored or venomous. They had survived by knowing they looked soft, by learning to be underestimated, by making themselves appear smaller than they were to things that counted power in visible, measurable terms. Size, strength, speed, while building, very quietly, in the space that the miscount created. She traced this forward into their history. The wars they had won, the species they were, on their own world, before they came to space. A history of creatures that had been outnumbered and outgunned, and had still, somehow, found the angle, found the gap, found the thing their enemy had counted wrong. When they arrived in galactic space, they brought the reflex with them. The military doctrine that every intelligence assessment had labeled internally inconsistent was internally inconsistent on purpose. 42,000 captains, trained in 42,000 different ways, so that no tactical model could project human fleet behavior from observed patterns, because observed patterns did not exist. A force that fights in a consistent way can be modeled. A force that cannot be modeled cannot be defeated by projection. The inconsistency was the doctrine. The slow drive technology was real. The public fleet was real. What was not real was the assumption that the public fleet was the whole fleet. Terran research installations had been running a parallel development program for 19 years. No intelligence service had found them. Veth, in her report, had called this remarkable. Orvala Sen called it predictable. The permit applications for those facilities had been filed in the wrong systems. Slightly wrong. Always slightly wrong. The applications were real, the locations were wrong, and the volume of misfiled construction paperwork in the Council Administrative Database was high enough that no automated system had ever flagged it as a pattern. 19 years of misfiled paperwork. 19 years of a facility that did not officially exist, building something that nobody was looking for. The resources stripped from the asteroid fields were not gone. They were moved, quietly, over years, to locations that were not on any survey map, because the ships that moved them flew the routes that were not on any navigation chart. The wealth was still there. The Velkari contracts had bought rights to coordinates on a map that had been emptied, carefully, in advance. Orvala Sen did not call any of this deception. She called it patience. She wrote, "A species that has spent 300,000 years being underestimated does not unlearn the skill when the circumstances improve. It simply finds larger theaters in which to practice it." The Council Intelligence Committee convened a closed hearing the same week the paper was published. They did not invite Orvala Sen. They invited Ambassador Yael Dove. She came alone. No aide. No legal counsel. She sat down across a table from 11 delegates and set her hands flat on the surface in front of her, the way a person sits when they have decided not to perform anything. The committee chair read from a summary document. He read the fleet numbers. Not the public ones. The real ones. The ones that Terran intelligence had provided voluntarily, which was its own kind of statement during the preliminary contact that had preceded the hearing. He read for 4 minutes. When he finished, the room was quiet in the way rooms get when the people in them are recalibrating. One delegate's translation earpiece slipped out. He did not bend to pick it up. Another's water glass tipped and rolled a few centimeters, and no one moved to stop it. The committee chair set his document down and looked at Yael Dove and asked the only question that mattered. How long have you been planning this? She looked at the committee. All 11 delegates. She looked at each of them in turn. Slowly. Without hurry. We've been planning this, she said, since the first time someone looked at us and decided we weren't worth worrying about. She paused. That was a very long time ago. No one spoke. She did not elaborate. She did not explain the scale, or the timeline, or the specific decisions. She did not walk them through what it had cost, or how many people over how many years had held this plan together without breaking cover, without making the kind of mistake that gets found. She did not tell them what it felt like to sit in a too-small chair while a room full of the most powerful species in the galaxy laughed at the numbers on a tablet, knowing that the numbers on the tablet were the numbers you had chosen to show them. She gave them one sentence. She trusted them to be smart enough to hold the rest of it. The committee chair tried a follow-up question. It was a procedural one, about the resource extraction sites. She answered it in 3 words. He tried another. She answered that one in 5. Not rude, not defiant. Simply precise in the way that someone is precise when they know that every additional word is a gift they are choosing whether or not to give. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. Walking out, one junior delegate Young, Calith, in his first year on the committee, fell into step briefly beside a Velkari senior minister and said, quietly, that he had just realized something. The minister asked what? Everything they showed us. The delegate said, everything we can verify, the ships, the facilities, the resource operations. She told us about it. They released that information. The minister said yes. That was correct. So what didn't they release? The delegate said. The minister had no answer for that. The delegate's question went into no official report, but it traveled, as questions do in closed circles, moving from person to person in the days that followed, changing slightly in the telling, picking up weight. What didn't they show us? It was, in the end, the most effective weapon humanity had. Not the ships. Not the map sent to Admiral Sarek. Not the stripped asteroid fields or the misfiled permits, or the 11 years of patient, invisible preparation. The weapon was the question itself. The possibility of a depth no one had found yet. The chance that what had been revealed was still only the surface of something. That below the patience, and the silent fleet, and the 19-year research program, there was another layer. And below that, another. And that humanity had had 300,000 years to learn exactly how deep to dig before anyone thought to start looking. Nobody could answer the question. That was the whole point. They came back on a Thursday morning. Not to Velkar Prime. Not in formation. Not with weapons powered or shields raised or any of the signals that every council member's military intelligence was watching for, had been watching for since the fleet vanished, had wargamed 100 times, trying to predict the shape of. They came back to the transit lanes. At every major choke point, every resupply nexus, every approach corridor that led toward a Velkari installation, or an allied planet, or a shipping route that kept someone's economy breathing, human ships appeared, in groups of 5, in groups of 12, holding position. Transponders on. Running lights visible. Every vessel, exactly where any long-range sensor could find it without working hard. Not blocking anything. Not threatening anything. Perfectly positioned. Perfectly legal. Perfectly still. Just there. The calls started within 20 minutes. Every Velkari system command post. Every allied military hub. Every commercial shipping authority in 4 sectors, all calling up the chain at the same time, asking the same question in different words. What are the orders? What do we do? The answer, from the top, was nothing, because there was nothing to respond to. The ships were legal. They had filed transit notices through automated channels overnight. They were where they said they would be. They were not in anyone's territory. They were not pointing weapons at anyone. They were not doing anything a member species was not permitted to do. They were simply there, 42,000 ships. Plus, the Galactic Convergence Council convened in 18 minutes, a new record for an emergency session by 11 minutes. 47 species filed in, delegates who had dressed in a hurry, aides who were still pulling up briefings on their tablets as they found seats. The chamber had the feeling of a room woken in the dark, everyone present. Nothing fully formed. The normal shapes of things slightly off. The Earth seat was occupied. Ambassador Yael Dov had arrived before any of them. She was sitting in the small chair at the far left edge, both feet flat on the floor, a single document on the table in front of her. Not a tablet. Paper. Actual paper, printed, bound with a plain clip. White pages, black text. The kind of object that in this chamber, among species who had used physical paper for ceremonial purposes only for 2 or 3 centuries, felt strange in a way that was hard to immediately name. Old. It felt old. Like something from before agreements were digital, before treaties were filed in databases, before everything was stored somewhere that could be accessed and edited and revised. Like something you could hold in your hands and that would not change. No one spoke first. The committee chair took his seat and looked at the paper, and then at Yael Dov, and then at the paper again. She did not offer an introduction. She did not open with a statement. She did not thank the council for their time, or express regret for the disruption, or perform any of the opening moves that 30 years of galactic diplomacy had made standard. She slid the document 3 centimeters across the table toward the center. The smallest possible motion. "We'd like to discuss membership terms," she said. The chamber was quiet. Then everyone started talking at once, and the committee chair called for order, and it took 4 minutes for the room to settle, because 4 minutes is how long it takes a chamber full of beings to understand that the moment they are in is not the moment they thought they were in. The document was 48 pages. It had been reviewed by Terran legal staff against the full council charter and every bilateral agreement Earth had ever signed. Every provision was sourced. Every request was cross-referenced to existing law. It was not a list of demands dressed up as a proposal. It was a proposal detailed, structured, argued cleanly, full membership rights restored. Permanent. Not subject to review or reclassification without a 2/3 supermajority of the full council, which was a threshold that had been reached exactly 3 times in the council's history. Territorial guarantees extended and defined precisely, with enforcement provisions that had teeth. A joint commission on resource rights with equal Terran representation. The small seat at the far left edge to be moved, resized, and placed in its correct position in the arc. That last item was 1 sentence at the bottom of page 47. It was not the most important item in the document. It was not meant to be. It was the sentence that Sorveth read 3 times. He sat across the arc from her. He had read the document in the 30 minutes between receiving his copy and the session beginning. He was a good diplomat, one of the best his species had produced in a generation, and he had read it the way good diplomats read documents, looking for the trap, looking for the leverage point, looking for what the other side was willing to give up. He could not find it. The document was clean. Every ask was reasonable. Every provision was backed by precedent. There was nothing to grab onto, nothing to attack, nothing to negotiate down to something smaller. It was not the document of someone who had won and was pressing the advantage. It was the document of someone who had made a list of what was fair and expected it to be honored. He looked at Yael Dov. She was looking at the document. He understood, sitting there, that he was trying to find the moment he had lost, and that the moment was not findable because it had not been a single moment. It had been 11 years. It had been a room full of laughter, and a too small chair, and 30-day review periods, and slightly wrong navigation data, and misfiled construction permits and asteroids that were full until they weren't. There had been no battle, no declaration, no ultimatum, delivered from a position of clear strength. She had stood in front of 47 species while they laughed at her numbers, and said 2 words that she knew, and they did not, were the wrong words to say. They counted us. When you count something, you believe you know its value. And when you believe you know its value, you stop looking. The motion on Earth's membership passed with 31 votes. Provisional reclassification was withdrawn without ceremony. The Joint Resource Commission was approved for formation. The seat would be moved. It was done in 40 minutes. Afterward, in the corridor, Bren found Yael Dove. He was not the same young man who had run to catch up with her in the transport bay a month ago. He was something quieter now, something that had watched 30 days pass with his hands behind his back, and had not broken. "Did you always know it would work?" he asked. She picked up her bag from a bench in the corridor. She slung it over one shoulder. "No," she said. She walked. He thought about following her. He didn't. He had learned, in 30 days, when she was finished talking, and when she was not. He had learned the shape of her silences. She walked the corridor alone. The delegates were still filing out of the chamber behind her, aides and advisors and intelligence officers and legal staff, all of them with things to say to each other. A room full of voices pulling at threads. She passed through a set of doors and the sound dropped away. The outer corridor was empty, long and gray, and lit with pale ceiling strips. Her footsteps were the only sound, and they echoed slightly. And she walked through that echo, straight and even, at the same pace she always walked. She did not know, walking there, what to do with what she felt. It was not victory. It was not relief. It was something without a clean name, the particular feeling of having held something very heavy for a very long time, and having set it down, and finding that your body still remembered the weight, still held the shape of carrying it, even now that your hands were empty. 30 years ago she had been a trade lawyer. 20 years ago a minor diplomatic attaché. 15 years ago she had sat in a room with 12 other people and heard a plan described and said, yes, she would carry it. Yes, she would sit in the small chair for however long it took. She had not known how long it would take. She knew what it had cost in ways that would not appear in any document. The outer door of the complex opened, and she stepped into the air of Velkar Prime. The city spread out below the steps, busy and bright, and, today, exactly as certain of itself as it had always been. She stood there for a moment. The air was cold. She had not brought a coat. She stood in it anyway, in the cold air of the planet that had laughed at her a month ago, and she felt the weight of the things she was not carrying anymore. Then she walked down the steps. There was a transport at the bottom. There was always more work. There always had been. She got in.